Although honestly we would prefer that if you're watching online and you were in our area that you were here instead of watching online, but we're glad that you're here regardless. We're going to begin with prayer. For those who are unfamiliar with this class, we started this class and we call it Foundations of Messianic Judaism because we had so many people coming from traditional Judaism trying to figure out what to do with Yeshua, people coming from traditional Christianity trying to figure out what to do with Judaism, and people coming from no faith background at all trying to figure it all out. So we wanted everybody to start out on a strong foundation, so we figured we would provide a mechanism for them to ask their questions early. So we're glad you're here. We're going to open in prayer. So Abba, Father, we thank you so much for this morning, this Shabbat that you've given us. We ask first that you allow us to right now come before you with humble hearts, repentant, asking you to heal, to cleanse, to restore, to forgive us individually. As we come to your throne, we want to come as a forgiven child. And so we come to your throne and we ask all of these requests to be met, to be touched, to be moved upon. And Father, help us to not only see you do each of these things, but give us the voice to speak of your wonder and share of the glorious things that you do as a testimony to others that they might turn to you also. And we thank you for all of this in Yeshua's name. Amen. Good morning. Okay, I have a couple of questions that came in. One came in, and these are both from people in the room, so these aren't people just that are sending them online, although you can send questions online at ravaeric@britam.org. If you want to, and I'll try to answer it next week. Exodus 14:11, what is meant by no graves in Egypt? They were being smart alecks. I know it would be shocking to you that generations before that people were smart alecks and talk that way, but they're talking to Moses and say, why'd you bring us out here to die? Weren't there graves in Egypt we could have been buried in? They're just being, it's shocking, but Jewish people have been doing this for a long time. And and by the way, you non-Jews either learned it from us or taught it to us. I'm not sure. So I don't want to leave that out. But yeah, they're being the same way we are. You know what, there weren't graves in Egypt we could have been buried in. You brought us out here, that kind of thing. So that's that. I love that the scriptures include those things. Like one of my favorite verses in the New Testament is when Paul says to the people at Mars Hill, I think you guys might be a little superstitious. It's like some of the best Jewish humor ever. He's standing in front of all these pagan gods and all these priests of these pagan gods, this whole thing, and he looks down and there's a marker for the unknown God, and he goes, I want to talk about this guy, but you guys may be a touch superstitious. So anyhow, I love that. I love that the Bible includes those kind of things. Psalms 5:8 says, make your way straight before me. What is David saying here? And what he's actually saying, if you read the whole thing, is allow me to see the straight path that you've made for me. It's not that he's asking him, like David is confessing his sin and asking God to show him the path he should take. The scripture says the path of a righteous man is ordered by the Lord. This is what he's talking about. He's just saying, let me see the straight path before me. Make a path that I can follow. And it's a prayer that I pray fairly regular. Lord, let me see where you want me to go today. Lead me where you want me to be, and let my eyes be open to what you want me to do when I get there. A lot of times we pray for the Lord to lead us places, and then we get there, but we don't do anything when we get there because we're not asking him also to show us what he would want us to do when we got there. Okay, those are the two questions that I had that came in before class. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody at all? Is there somebody with a question anywhere at all? Okay, go ahead.
Rabbi, give me your wisdom on the difference between proselytizing and Judaizing.
Proselytizing is welcoming people into God's kingdom. Judaizing is telling people they have to become Jewish physically in order to be part of God's kingdom.
So Jews can proselytize.
Yes.
Rather than Judaize. Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing. The problem with proselytization isn't in actually what it's doing, it's how you're doing it. In other words, if we sent people to Rabbi David's congregation and Rabbi Wayne's congregation to try to get them to come to our congregation, then we would be proselytizing in a wrong way. But if we went out to the grocery store to make disciples and proselytize people into the kingdom, we're doing it the right way. If we Judaize, what we're trying to do is make people Jewish, which is not the same as make people believers. One of the biggest things, and I drum this over and over, is you can be Jewish and not follow Judaism, and you can follow Judaism and not be Jewish.
So Judaizing is not proselytizing. They're two separate things.
Two separate things.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Marilyn.
You mentioned David before.
David, which one?
The David.
Okay.
King David.
David HaMelech, the king.
He was punished for what he did with Bathsheba, and they lost the baby.
Yes.
But then God saw fit to let him have Bathsheba and another son by her. And I'm just wondering, was he totally forgiven when he took the first son?
This is a great question.
So can you repeat it?
I'm going to, because there's some background noise.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, so the question is, David has a illicit experience with Bathsheba. And the result of that is his child dies. But then he continues with Bathsheba and has children, at least child, with her. Does God completely forgive him for his actions? And was the death of the child sufficient sacrifice to cover David's sin? So I want to unpack that this morning, because I don't believe that the child's death was God's punishment for David's sin. I firmly believe that the child's death was God's blessing to demonstrate his absolute forgiveness of David's sin. The reason I say that is if you watch the rest of what happens to David's kids, their life's pretty messed up. And we have to change our view on this stuff. The absolute best thing that could happen to any of us who are believers is us leave right now and be in the presence of the Lord. I mean, we're running this race trying not to cross the finish line. I mean, in reality, we're like, I'm running as fast as I can, but I don't want to actually cross the finish line. I don't want to win the race. I want the race to keep getting longer. That's what we do. But if we understood that the greatest blessing that can happen to a believer is them to be in the presence of the Lord, and while it's very painful for us to lose a child, if we are believers, that child's in the presence of the Lord, and what happened was that child was spared all the heartaches of this life, all the pain of this life, all the disease of this life, all the bad things that can possibly happen in this life, and they went directly into the presence of Adonai. Now that's hard for us to understand because that's not how our minds work, because we're very selfish and we're very emotional and everything is about us. And I understand that. And look, I'm honest with you. One of the most traumatic things that ever happened in my life was the loss of our baby, when Pammy lost a baby, and then we were in the middle of adopting a child, and it was adopted out from under us, which affected me more than losing the baby. Pammy was affected more by losing the baby that was within her. I was affected more by losing the baby that was outside of us. But we both lost, and I was like miserable, selfish, angry at the situation until God dealt with my heart and helped me to understand His perspective on these things. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. When my mom passed, it hurt my heart. But she passed after saying, I just spent all night in worshiping my Messiah. So how could I actually look at that as anything but a blessing? except for my feelings. So I believe that by taking that baby, God demonstrated his absolute forgiveness of David and his actions by taking that baby directly into his presence, rather than having that baby go through life, which ends up dividing the kingdom, all of the things that happened with David's sons, the sin that enters into Israel, and all that this child would have been involved in. So I don't think it was God punishment. I think it was God showing his absolute forgiveness and taking that baby directly into the arms of God. And I believe David understood that, because David's whole life instantly changes from sackcloth and ashes to worshiping the Creator. Okay? So I don't see that as God punishing him. I see that as a demonstration of God's absolute forgiveness. And then David dealt with his choices. He made the choice to have Bathsheba. Their life went on from that choice. Every one of us in this room, except for my wife, who has only made good choices, has made bad choices, and we live out those choices trying to make them line up with God's plan, living through them to do that. So that's why the relationship continues, the children come. God doesn't punish them continuing, but they still have to deal with. He couldn't just toss her to the curb. David, one of my favorite and least favorite characters in the Bible. I'm so glad he's there, because I keep looking and going, at least I'm not as bad as David. Because he was he was both, he was like the epitome of the horrible congregant. Like, he came to worship, he was there at worship, he did all the outward things, did all the stuff, he had the prophet, all these things. At the same time, he doesn't go to war. He sees a woman going through a ritual immersion. He has her brought to him. He rapes her. And all this happens. And then, he goes through all the, you are the man who took the sheep. The guy, all of this happens. And then God demonstrates his forgiveness.
Don't forget Uriah.
Right, Uriah gets killed. Murdered. All of this happens. So I look and I go, man, why couldn't you just put a book of good people we could follow? But part of it is God demonstrating his absolute forgiveness and grace and mercy, and how God can take a bad situation and use it for his kingdom's glory somehow. And I'm grateful for that, because I'm a bad situation that he turned into something that he could use for his glory in his kingdom. Okay, great question. So I'm going to repeat it for this side in case you guys didn't hear him. The Bible talks about Israel being in slavery for 430 years. But if you look historically at what we would call slavery, it's only somewhere around 80 years that they were actually in the thralls of physical slavery. Bondage, what we would call slavery by our definition. However, God considered it slavery from the minute they went into Egypt and out of the promised land. When we are out of God's will, out of God's plan, out of God's promises, we are in slavery even if we don't recognize it. And so that's the difference. If you're talking about the actual mentality of servitude, that would be 2 generations, two and a half generations. But if you're talking about being subjugated to Egyptian life, Egyptian idolatry, all that stuff, then it would be the whole time. So it depends how we look at slavery. And a lot of times, we don't think of ourselves as enslaved by something until it becomes an addiction or until it becomes something we can't control. When somebody opens up an adult website the very first time, and they go, oh, I shouldn't look at that, and they go off. But the seed gets planted and they start, well, I wonder, they've become slaves. Now, it may be months, weeks, years, whatever, before they're sitting there controlled, where every time they get on their phone or they're they sit in front of their computer or turn on a television, they have to watch those things. But the slavery began the minute they did not put that thought under subjection to God's Spirit and allowed the seed to come into their life. It's the same thing. You may be in a very difficult marriage where you feel, not you in particular, right. I'm just saying. Right, you other than me, you're, and Dave also, and Stan, and well, everybody in here has perfect wives. All the problems come from the men. I understand that. So, okay. But anyhow, so if you're in a relationship where things are in crisis, and you think you're subjugated to this, and people are like, oh, well, I'm stuck with it. That wasn't when your slavery began. Your slavery began when you started to allow seeds of division and separation and anger and malice and jealousy and all that. When those started, that ultimately became, and you didn't put those thoughts under subjection to your spirit, to God's Spirit within you. So that's when the slavery begins. So Torah explicitly forbids touching blood, those with sara'at, and dead bodies, yet Yeshua touched all of them, or was touched by them, albeit to heal them, but if he followed Torah to the letter, why is this exception? She said, I suspect it has something to do with Exodus 29:37, but even certain things defile the altar. So I'm going to answer this. First of all, it has nothing to do with Exodus 29:37. The answer to this is much simpler than that. Torah forbids touching these things and then going into the temple without going through cleansing ritual. Touching these things in and of themselves isn't sin, it's unclean. And there's a difference between uncleanliness and sin. When a woman has a baby, she becomes unclean, but she didn't sin. It's not a sin thing, it's a cleanliness thing. And so all of these things are, you can't touch this and then go into the temple. You can't touch this and enter into the temple without going through the amount of days that you had to go through and the immersion, the cleansing rituals, changing of clothes, different things like that. So while the Torah does forbid touching these things, it forbids them in relation to entering into the tabernacle or the temple. So it's the piano. So that's important that we notate those things. So that's the answer to that question. Okay, another question came from Wendy. I have a question I'd appreciate you would answer in today's Foundations class. Matthew 22:14 says, many are called, but a few are chosen. This morning, many are cold and a few are frozen. Luke 18:7-8 talks about the unrighteous judge and the persistent widow pleading for justice. Yeshua says, won't God do justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he be slow to help them? I tell you, he will quickly give them justice. The question I have is, who are the chosen ones? And then personal question involved is a promise that those who are walking in spirit and truth, he will give them justice when they cry out day and night against injustice. Okay, so the chosen ones, I believe, are those who not only were called but responded. I think that those in this room are largely the chosen. Now, that's separate from Israel being the chosen in the covenant God has with the physical people Israel. And we need to understand that just because the word chosen is used doesn't mean it applies every time to the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In this case, he's talking about the believers. You have not chosen me, but I've chosen you and called you. So, but the response to being the chosen is that you get up and do something. You respond to that. I think that part of this, and John and I were talking about this earlier, part of the reason that our prayers get answered is when our prayers cease to be about us and start to be about God's testimony. In other words, if you're praying for healing, When your prayer stops being about, I want to be healed so I can live longer, and start to be about, I want to be healed so the testimony of God will be spread abroad, so that when it becomes not about you but about Him, then our humility and our humbleness before Him activates His Spirit in a way that brings about those things. And I actually use the example of giving. There are a lot of teachers, and I hear this on when I listen to the radio. I listen to Christian radio late at night when I'm driving because it keeps me awake, because it makes me angry. And as long as, if I don't want to go to sleep, so I listen to things that kind of keep my blood boiling. And you listen to them and you'll hear both on TV and on radio, people will say, you should give to God so that He'll give to you. Give and it should be, and they put, now the truth is, if you give, it will be given to you. But if you're giving to God so that you'll receive, you're in a business transaction of value for value, and that's not giving. If Stan has a truck to sell, and I give him $10,000 and he gives me a $10,000 truck, I didn't give him anything. We had a transaction of value for value. And a lot of us give to the Lord in a transaction of value for value. I'm giving to you because it's an investment in which I expect to receive dividends above what I'm giving, and that's not giving. That's investing. And that's not the same thing. But when we give to the Lord because we want to share His testimony, when we give to the Lord because He is God regardless of anything else, when it's about Him and not us, then it opens the doors for God to pour out on us the blessing that He promised us. And it's the same thing in a lot of things. We want our children to live right before the Lord, and I think all of us do. And that's an important thing, and it's something that we should pray for. But if we're praying for our children to be right before the Lord so that they can prosper in their lives, we may get our answer, but that prosperity may not lead them to live for the Lord. But when we're doing it so that the testimony of God's faithfulness, l'ador vador, from generation to generation can be shown, then we'll see God's hand in our children. Same thing with our marriages, same thing with our businesses. When our business becomes a ministry opportunity for the Lord, that's one of the things that I mentioned Stan already once, I'm going to say it again. His job is a ministry. It's not, when I talk to people about Stan that work for him, when I go pay my taxes to the tax collector, his people talk about his faith and his belief and his God. So, and it's not just Stan, he just happens to be sitting close where I can see him. If you're sitting further away, I don't see you as well. But it's important that our testimony, if my testimony is about my speaking ability, then I've failed as a leader. If my testimony is about our community's love for God and for people, then we have done what we're supposed to. And that's a really important differential. Okay, so here's the thing. In this week's Torah Parsha, we have the destroyer who comes through and takes life. And from that, the question is the destroyer Satan himself? Is the destroyer a fallen angel working on behalf of Satan? Or is the destroyer actually God doing this? Or a heavenly angel working on behalf of God? And the answer to that question that I have is, I don't know. And here's the reason I say that. I think the destroyer can actually be just the result of rebellion against God. I don't think when it says the destroyer passed over the homes of Egypt, I think that there are times where our rebellion against God brings God judgment in such a way. I think that when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah happened, I think the destroyer came upon that city. But it doesn't say it was a person. I think that sometimes we give human form to things that aren't necessarily human form. And I think it's just the destroyer destroys, and the destroyer was let loose as a result of sin. So when we sin and rebel, destruction comes into our life. I don't think it's God going, I'm going to destroy you in that way. I think Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of their actions. It was a choice. And they had opportunity not to, and they chose to. Yes?
In Daniel chapter 10, Daniel's talking about the vision that he had, and he said that he ate no food or drank, the wine or ate the bread, but he said this was on the 24th day of the first month. So he would have been doing that during Passover. So how would he have not eaten the lamb because it was Passover?
Okay, where was he?
So he's in Babylon.
Okay, so he couldn't eat the lamb anyhow.
Okay, because he wasn't
in Jerusalem.
Got it. Thank you.
So, a lot of these things are really much easier than we make them. Yes, dear.
Revelations 3:9, it says, "Behold, I will cause those in the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jewish but are not, but lie. I will cause them to bow down." Who's he referring to by those Jewish people?
People who claim to be Jewish who are not.
Oh, okay.
It's really much simpler than all the theological mishmash that people put on it.
Okay.
So it's interesting. By the way, if you get a chance, look up the word synagogue in the Bible and see where it's used, and actually in the Greek, synagoge, and see how many times it's translated synagogue and how many times they changed it from synagogue to something else. In other words, whenever it's used to make Jewish people look bad, it's called synagogue. And whenever the same word is translated to be congregation or assembly or different things, whenever it's making Jewish people look good. So it's a translation issue in the text. But the word here is synagogue, but this is saying those who say they are Jewish but they're not. It's talking about people who claim to be Jewish but aren't. And that's what...
Doesn't have anything to do with us Gentiles.
Doesn't have anything to do with Gentiles. Gentile believers should never claim to be Jewish.
Right.
They don't need to be.
We're Gentiles.
That's right. God saves Gentiles as Gentiles.
Okay.
And then they become part of the Commonwealth of Israel, grafted into the tree. But you don't have to. The whole book of Galatians is all about you don't have to physically become Jewish in order to be a believer.
Okay. Thank you.
So, really good question. Next question. Yes, dear.
The timing of the plagues, the span.
We aren't given the full timing. I've read anywhere from 6 to 8 months to 2 to 3 years, depending on the writers, because unfortunately in this text we don't have things like before the feast, after the feast, some kind of meter to say in the third month, in this month, in that month. We have things like, and it lasted for 3 days, or it lasted, but not really time markers to say how long it is. It doesn't appear as if it was like, 30 days later they were out of there. But it doesn't give us a real set way to say how long it is, so I'm careful not to make things up that way.
So
Yes.
then when they say, go speak to Pharaoh tomorrow, would it actually have been tomorrow, or maybe 2 or 3 days later?
The question is, does it mean go tomorrow to speak to Pharaoh or go speak to Pharaoh tomorrow? Those are different things. If I tell Sam, go tomorrow to California, he would leave tomorrow to go to California. He might not be there for 6 months. Or if I say, tomorrow be in California, that's a different. The Hebrew gives variance to both of those things. So we're not sure if he actually walked into Pharaoh's palace the next day or he left for Pharaoh's palace the next day. So those things are things we have to deal with in the questioning. But that's a great question. Yes, sir.
Dealing with the Sabbath, what is determined to be work?
What is determined to be work? My definition for that is anything that brings profit or increase to you is work.
So if you go out and you're plucking weeds out of your flower garden, would that be considered work?
Out of a flower garden, unless you're selling the flowers, I would not see that as work. If you were selling the flowers, now if it was a vegetable garden, then that could be considered work because you were getting increase from what you were doing. I can tell you that for me, weeding a garden is work. But for some people, it's cathartic. But so it depends. Part of it depends on you. What is your reason? What is your purpose? There are people that go out to go fishing and they're really not fishing. They're sitting on the lake, watching the bobbin go up and down, meditating on the Lord, praying, seeking the Lord, thinking about Scripture, all that. And they're not out to catch a fish. And if they catch it, they release it and it goes back in. There are other people who, they're sitting there going, why aren't you biting? I've been here 10 minutes. What's going on? That's work. So there are things that's what matters. But things that bring increase to you or profit to you are largely the... Now the rabbis say any of the 39 actions that were used to make the tabernacle are listed as work. So sowing, cutting, digging, building, all that is considered work. And the reason they say that is because it says, and they ceased their work on the tabernacle on the Shabbat.
Well, that's like when we had our trip in the elevators. You said.
Right. Yeah. So the elevators go on Shabbat mode so that you don't have to push the button and make fire. It doesn't have anything. But again, I look at this stuff and I go, something's wrong in the common sense department, because at the hotels, almost all of them have a revolving door, which is electric. Okay, so they turn it off on Shabbat so it's not making fire. But then you have to push this heavy door to get in, which is a much more work than it would be to, so that's a different thing. But again, observing the Shabbat is about the testimony of God. If it becomes about you instead of Him, then you're violating the Shabbat, regardless of what it is. Yvonne asked a question. Hi. In Exodus 6:18, it goes into the genealogy of Kohath, and it gives 3 of the 4 sons. What happened to the 4th son, Hebron? Okay, so if you look in your Bibles, and you can do it now or you can do it later, in Exodus 6:18, it's describing the children of the sons of Aaron, one of which is Kohath, and he has 4 sons. One of those sons is Hebron. But when you read further on in the verses, it talks about the other 3 sons, and it does not give any further information about Hebron. So Yvonne is wondering, what happened to Hebron? Well, if you read in Numbers 3 and several other places, you'll see that the children of Hebron still exist, are still there. They just didn't give that name for whatever reason, and I have no idea why, that they didn't give more information in the verse in Exodus, but they didn't disappear because they're still there in Numbers. So for whatever reason, the name and the information, like the other 3, isn't given there, and I'm not going to make up a reason why. So, okay, Stephen asked a question. Thank you, Stephen. Why did God allow sin to exist in the first place? It can seem negligent, like leaving a hot stove on near a small child. While God provides forgiveness for sin through Messiah, there would be no need for forgiveness as sin never existed. If sin merely exists to cause us to need Messiah, is God offering a remedy for a problem he allowed to happen? Wasn't that like an add-on to the question? It was like right at the end of the question. Thank you for supporting my efforts here. Okay, if you haven't already, please turn devices to stun or silent mode. Thank you. Okay, so the answer to this question is, I got no idea. And I'm just going to be honest. One answer towards this question, because I can't answer what God thought, and I'm not going to pretend I can. One answer is that the only way God could create a world where sin wasn't a possibility, because sin is merely deviating from God's intent. Okay? We think of sin as like adultery or fornication or whatever, but you can sin by not feeding the poor. You can sin by not loving your children the way you should. You could say there's lots of sins that we don't put in this thing. But the only way that there could be a world where no opportunity for sin would be present is if God made robots and not people. If they were programmed where it was impossible to sin, then that would happen. But God created beings after His image and in His likeness, which have the ability to think. I wish some of them would use that ability, but it is that. So I don't know. I can't give you a definitive answer, but God created man in a world where there was no present sin, but gave them opportunity to choose to love and serve Him or not. And they could have chosen to serve Him completely, but they didn't. And again, I can't answer why did that. I do not see it as unjust because God can't be unjust. So I can't say, well, God did this because of this or God did that because of that. There's plenty of people that made up answers for that, but I'm not going to put myself. I can't understand people. I'm not going to try to understand God. But the only way that it's kind of like I've said this before. Ministry would be easy if there weren't people, and God's kingdom would be perfect if there weren't people. But as soon as you bring people into it, as soon as human element enters in, there's a possibility for imperfection. So I don't know why, but I don't see it as unjust because God can't be unjust. But I don't understand it fully.
Pope Francis made a declaration in his points at the end of the year that the Catholic Church would now accept homosexuality, marriage, and so on and so forth.
Okay, first of all, let me say what you just said isn't true, but I'm going to correct it. I still think what he did was evil. Okay? He came out and he said that they would bless homosexual relationships, but they're not calling it marriage. That's kind of like walking the finest fence post you can possibly do to try to... It's evil. Homosexual relationships are ungodly and unbiblical regardless of whether you call it marriage or not. There's no justification for homosexual relationships at all. So I just want to correct. He did not, and if you read what he said, he did not endorse marriage. And his statement says that over and over, but he endorsed homosexual relationships that pretend to be marriage. Yeah, kind of like civil unions. So it is evil, and it's one of the end time things. I mean, we look at what's going to happen. We just read those verses about ungodliness and unrighteousness and ungodly relationships and all that. And it's clear that this is one more group that is leaning into that way. They have also subtly made excuses for abortion that have never been made by the Catholic Church previous to the last year. So while the Catholic Church has been historically one of the most pro-life supportive groups there is, there's chinks in the wall of their support through that. Yes, Donna?
Talking about homosexuality.
Do we have to? Go ahead. Okay. Yes.
And I don't know how many people are dealing with this, but we have some children within our family
Right. And I have,
who have declared that they are gay.
yeah.
And the only thing that I know to do with them is just to love them as a person. And so don't accept what they're doing, but I don't know what to do beyond that.
Prayer. And here's the thing. We tend to look at things like homosexuality as if it's different than other sins. Like if you have an alcoholic relative, you know their alcoholism is wrong, you know their drug abuse is wrong, those things. You don't like tell them they're not your family anymore. But you don't accept their thing. You're not going to buy them drinks, you're not going to go to a bar with them, you're not going to do and you're not going to support their lifestyle. And if opportunity comes up for you to share with them lovingly, and listen, lovingly doesn't always mean nicely. When Yeshua drove the people out the temple, he was still being loving. Okay? So there are times when we have to be adversarial in our presentation of these things. But same thing with me. I have family members whose children are, they invited me to come to their wedding. And I was like, no. Would you do our ceremony? No, I won't. I'm not endorsing that. That doesn't mean I won't sit at a table with the family when you're, if the whole family is at a reunion and we're all sitting down to eat. I'm going to sit next to you, well, not next to you if I can avoid it, but because we don't get along. But I'm going to sit, and if you came and sat next to me and asked me questions, I would be loving and kind, but I would answer straightforward. I would not wishy-wash on what's right. The same way if somebody came sat next to me that was a liar or an adulterer or a thief or whatever, I would still do that. But I'm not going to go and participate in something that would be endorsing their relationship or what they're doing. Just like I wouldn't go drive the car for somebody when they were robbing a bank. Just not going to do those things. But prayer is really the only thing that's going to change them. But here's the thing. Yeshua went and ministered to sinners where they were. Okay? And so I think we need to look at that as that thing. But he didn't invite them to come commit their sin at his house. So that's how I look at it. Yes.
And on that note, that's what I was going to ask you. Because I see people that kind of look at the homosexuality thing different than other forms of sexual sin. And my understanding is it's no different in the homosexuality and people copulating before marriage and parents giving their children birth control or condoms before going into a marriage or whatever. I mean, I think it's evil. That's evil anyway. So, but
well, I think that sin is sin, and sexual immorality is sexual morality, regardless of which thing. We also have to understand that while we look at things and say, this sin is worse than that sin, and so on, when it comes to sexual immorality, God even says, this is something that's so severe that there's times you have to pray that the adversary would destroy their bodies so that their soul might be saved. That's a pretty strong statement. And that's the only sin that we read where God says there's sometimes you have to pray